In terms of my approach to design, I've always been interested in things that I think are like a little bit unusual to maybe more traditional designers, things that kind of make me scratch my head or want to look twice. And you know, these are generally things that I think come as inspiration from like pop culture, in a lot of cases pop art or even cartoons. I've been in the habit since I was a graduate student of just being interested in like character animation, character as an architectural idea even. Might be overly idiosyncratic or quirky, but those things on that level were interesting to me. Things that had aesthetics and kind of like, you know, the capacity to cause a person to feel a certain way that are very much in excess of just being like, okay, I need to make a good design. I'm Dan Hapton. I'm the principal of the design studio AITCH, which is the phonetic spelling of the letter H. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Calgary's School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape. I'm originally Canadian, actually born and raised in Calgary, but I left at a relatively young age to venture into the fields of architecture and adjacent design fields. I went to Vancouver first. I did my Bachelor of Environmental Design there, and then spent a number of years working in Europe with some strange architects, doing fun stuff, and eventually found myself in Los Angeles doing my graduate studies at SciArc, which is, at least in the field of architecture, a kind of well-known institution for being kind of avant-garde and innovative. I think there's a good story to this project. I mean, this is the project that actually, for better or worse, brought me back to Calgary from Los Angeles. In a way, it's like my flagship project. A couple things that came out of, you know, studying the plan and then soon after that getting out here to be able to visit this space was this understanding of, okay, what is good about it? And the reason that the clients liked this condo to begin with was it has these incredible views of the Rocky Mountains to the west of here, and then also really great views of downtown Calgary in the other direction. An essentially like kind of panoramic sweep in terms of how the windows of this unit are laid out. So understanding that was significant because like one thing that occurred to me right away was like, okay, if they bought this place because they love like these views, let's do our best to try to keep the spaces like along the perimeter windows open. The tendency in the building is actually to populate stuff right up against the windows. The people like sofa backed onto a window, like weird millwork, like all this stuff. And it basically turns the occupation of the unit away from the view, right? It makes it so like when you live in here, you look back towards the core of the building. So one thing that I thought was really important was that when I started working on it, it was like a rule I gave myself. I'm not gonna touch the windows as much as possible. I'm gonna try to like maintain that orientation of the user because they really love that. Okay, let's maintain that. As well as, if possible, I would want to also like try to frame these views. The other kind of existing condition that became like parameters for my design, the ceilings in this place are low. It's like this sort of like eight foot, or realistically less than 8 foot, like pizza box shaped space. You know, to be able to get services anywhere was some kind of a trick where it had to kind of, I couldn't put it on the floor. Like there's no capacity to dig into the floor or ceiling in here, right? And the floor we're standing on is the floor. This is the slab, right? And then also the structure is post-tensioned concrete. To get any services anywhere in one of these units, you have to build like drop ceilings. You have to build bulkheads, right? So in terms of like figuring out, okay, where do we want something to happen? If I want a TV over there, or I don't know, the kitchen where it is, or like the office where it is, like how do we get light over there? How do we get power over there? Became a problem of really like making the ceiling play this game, achieve this trick for us. It's actually really only where it needs to be. In terms of the depth of it, that was a trick that my collaborators in this project, specifically people like Rocky Point Custom Homes, Cam Krejci, and his team of subcontractors really helped me figure out what was possible in terms of dimensional constraints, and then I basically had to like 3D model the whole thing out in a super detailed way to be able to figure out, okay, like how do we actually make this work? But it was things like the HVAC subcontractor, like we can do this with high velocity, which means like we only need like this many ducts, and we can use these elliptical shaped ducts that are like, they're only like this deep. And then the high velocity tubes, we can use like tubes that are kind of like, you know, like a 3 or 4 inch diameter or something. Probably a 2-inch radius is what they were. And they're all like bendy, so we can kind of wind them around and, you know, hide them in different places and stuff them into different things. And that's gonna be the trick. And then we did the same thing with the electricians. A tape to the slab and to the bottom of it, you would measure 7 inches. And that's including like that 1-inch lighting cove on top, right? Which, if you think about it, that's super low profile for the amount of junk that we fit up in there. And if you think about, you know, okay, this is 7 inches versus like the 1970s or 80s version that was like a foot, we really saved a lot there. And that goes a long way in just, I think, making the space feel like, it just feels better. Like proportionally, as a human being standing here, it's like I'm not feeling crushed. Yeah. I think it's important to note, or to explain anyways, there's a lot of thinking in here that actually operates well in excess of the site. There's a modest use of curvature in this design. Someone else might say there's an unnecessary use of curvature, I don't know. I think it's modest. You know, one is that the idea of things that could kind of be a little cartoonish or like kind of fold or like drop into a corner in an unusual way, like the Art Schwager example. Like there were people that, you know, I was really interested in as a student, like, you know, probably the granddaddy of it would have been John Haydick, who had all these weird designs for like masquerades of strange architectural figures that, you know, were literally named like different characters. Like this is the painter, and it's like this weird looking house-ish sculpture. And, you know, this is the musician, kind of a thing. To like the sort of descendants of that, people like Jimenez Lai and Bureau Spectacular, they were in Los Angeles at the same time I was in Los Angeles. And so I got into making my own kind of weird character animations in that vein. That's like where, again, that's where this desire to create something that could be related to that interest here was something I tried to do. And so to me, the tectonic, and when I say tectonic in this case, I mean that like in a very traditional sense of tectonic. I don't mean like sticks or stick framing, but that the idea that what tectonics are is the way that like architectural form expresses something to you about itself. That's all it means to me. And so when something in this place turns a corner or like hits a corner and like, or has to peel back and, you know, is forced to do that for whatever reason, like it is, for me, intended to read like, you know, it's like this piece peeled back to make room for something else to happen, right? Like the ceiling had to kind of like turn down to light this piece of art. Then the other idea that I think the curve as a sort of tectonic feature enables is that all of the sort of elements in the project that are materially, for lack of better description, neutral in this case, right? These things that are painted this sort of like off-white color, in my mind, wanted to be understood as related in the project. So not necessarily as separate architectural elements in how we would like traditionally conceive, right? Not as like, okay, yeah, it's like the ceiling turns down and becomes the wall. Or this wall sort of, you know, goes this way and takes a curve and then turns up and becomes the ceiling. Rather than wall is a separate thing, ceiling is a separate thing, cabinet is a separate thing. One thing that enabled the project to be, I think, more coherent than let's say a traditional design project was the use of 3D modeling and like, at the time, relatively nascent VR tools. pretty much everything in this project was included in the 3D model. You know, I think all the HVAC, all the light fixtures, all the fixtures, all the details were modeled, and so was all the furniture and essentially all of the art in the space as well. And so we were able to really kind of, you know, curate, like really test where's something going to look good, how's it going to fit. And it got to the point where, you know, this is kind of ridiculous, you know, actually, but it got to the point where we knew what the sculptures were going to be in this space, and we started to do things that were like just for those sculptures. I had 3D models of those, and we knew like, okay, that's how they're going to go. I'm going to put like, you know, these lights for those sculptures. I'm going to, you know, the depth of the niche is like for that. So the space was really like highly coordinated in 3D well before we were, you know, even building anything. Things developed with the construction because there was a lot of problem solving, like real-time problem solving, kind of in collaboration with Cam and the Rocky Point team to figure out, like, you know, how we were going to detail something, or if, let's say, something I had drawn didn't make sense to one of the builders, like how do we sort of resolve that? So the 3D model became, you know, like it probably does, how like for a big architectural project like BIM wants to function, right? Where like all the consultants and everyone's got this coordinated model. We weren't using BIM, but I was definitely in the middle of this as the sort of, you know, whiz kid, like whatever video game kid with like this like gaming laptop and this 3D model, where if some guy was like, I don't think this works, I'm like, okay, like come hang with me, like let's model it, like let's figure it out and let's agree on how it's going to work. Yeah, one thing I'll speak to briefly about the project is the space saving tricks that are in here, which there's a lot of funny little storage integrated into here. It's kind of all over. Like the plinth for the sculptures has drawers under it. The breakfast counter, the kitchen island thing, has, you know, cupboards underneath there that you kick accidentally if you're sitting, you know, whatever. So it's just kind of hidden everywhere. And that's part of, like, again, making the space more functional for people that are used to living in a bigger space, but also keeping the aesthetic, because you need to be able to put things away for the space to feel right. Brought to you by the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G.